Hello, today we're going to look at the kind of work available teaching English overseas and how to go about finding it. So I'll see you there. Hi, before we get started, just want to apologise for the delay in this video coming out. It's been absolutely crazy here with our coming move to China. There'll be a video about all of that coming up very, very soon. But in the meantime, sorry, I'll try not to let it happen again. Okay, let's get started with language schools. Private language schools are the kind of places that typically open late afternoon and evening for adults to come after work or kids to come after school and take lessons specifically in a language, in this case obviously English. There's pros and cons to working for the language schools. We'll start with the cons really. The pay will tend to be lower than almost any other kind of teaching work that you're going to get. Language schools are often competing purely on a price basis, and that reflects in what they're going to pay you as a teacher. The second thing is hours there can be a little bit antisocial. You're working late afternoons and evenings when you'd really rather be out with friends or people you've met around and about. So the hours aren't ideal. And the other negative is job security. These schools are entirely dependent on the number of students coming through, and if there aren't enough students coming through to provide you a class, very often your class will disappear, your hours will vanish, and often your job will go too. On the plus side, see, it's not all bad. These are typically the kind of jobs that require the lowest level of qualification to get in. That's not to say you can go anywhere and do this. You do need to take into account the visa requirements of the countries that these places are set in. But for the establishments themselves, there isn't always a very high bar to entry in terms of qualifications and experience. So it can be a really good place to get started. Now, with the schools not having much commitment to you in terms of job security, it's fair to approach these things without having an awful lot of commitment to them. So if you are just passing through and you want to do something for a little while, they'll be well used to people popping in for a month or two and then disappearing again. That's changing a little now, as increasingly employers all over the world and in every industry start to want the moon on a stick from you. But I would certainly feel better myself walking out of a language school job when it was time to move on than I would out of a job based in a school or a university where students are actually depending on you to get them through a course. And the last positive I'm going to give you for the language school jobs is that very often you'll be working with adults who are paying for their own lessons, so they can be quite motivated to learn. And I've met a few friends doing these kind of gigs over the years. I've made a few friends with students. That's been a nice thing. Okay, second up, we've got private tutoring. This is where you would go to a country, you would set yourself up and advertise your services as a teacher to private students who are going to come to you in either small groups of maybe 2 or 3, or as individuals wanting one-to-one lessons. Again, there are pros and cons, and we'll go through those now. Let's start with the pros this time. The money per hour is considerably better. You can be charging around the same sort of rate as the schools, if not a little bit more for one-to-one tuition. But all of that money is then going to you. It's not got the school's 30, 40, 50% of that fee being taken away. So for the same amount of work, if you're fortunate with this, you can make a lot more money than you would make at a language school. But do note that this is if you're fortunate, and we'll get to that in a moment. The other thing, of course, is when you're your own boss, you can choose who you work with, again, in ideal conditions. So if you've got that student that is really just paggering your head every day, I want it this way, I want it that way, they're not doing their homework, they're not studying, you can get rid of them, which is something that you wouldn't be able to do at a language school. If you take a dislike to somebody immediately, you can get rid of them. You don't have to work with anybody. And again, this depends on how fortunate you are in your circumstances, but it is a perk of the job. And finally, on the perks here, it's a great way to make friends. Your students, many of them, you will have met in a social situation anyway. They're going to ask you for lessons. You're going to give those lessons, and you're going to get to know each other, because a lot of lessons for a lot of people are just talking about themselves and talking about their families and wanting to make conversation. And inevitably, in that sort of environment, you're going to make friends with people. I did say that was the last pro, but it's not. If you are fortunate, again, and we'll come to that, you can choose your own hours if you're working for yourself. You don't have to be bound to the hours of a school and somebody else's timetable. If you can get sufficient students and you're fortunate enough to be able to line them up correctly, you can choose when you work and have your days or evenings free as you choose. The cons of doing this, they relate very much to the pros. With everything that I did say, if you're fortunate in your situation, and so basically, if you can afford it, you can choose who you work with if you've got enough students and you can afford to do it. You can pick your hours, either if you're very, very lucky, or if you've got a huge selection of students to pick from, and you can pick the ones that can arrive at these times. I've been in a position where things got bad for me in Hungary for a little while, and I was working 10, 12-hour days, with huge gaps between students. I'd rented offices to do this. We were doing really well, my wife and I. And as things began to fall off during an economic downturn in Europe, we found students falling off and us not being able to afford to cancel later students in the day. So we might have a few lessons in the morning, a few mid-afternoon, and then a few late in the evening. And you find you can be working very long hours if you don't sort that out correctly. So it's good, and it's possible to work your own hours, but you do have to be quite fortunate in order to do it. And the last one I'll mention here is that when students become friends, it's great. But you then have to draw the line between conversations that you're having with them for money and conversations that you're having with them socially. Inevitably, in social situations, they're going to ask you questions about English, and you're going to answer them because you're making friends and they're great people, and I've met some great people like this. But you might find that they will start to book fewer sessions because they're going to see you on Tuesday for a beer anyway, and that can eat into your income. That's something that's happened to us as well. It's just something to be aware of. Making friends is great, but so is making a living. One more word on private teaching. How I got started in this game was being a private teacher for a family in Hungary. They hired me, well, and my wife, full-time to teach their boys at home. They paid us fantastic money. They gave us a fantastic apartment and car. They were very well-off people who treated us extremely well. These gigs are available. These gigs are rare. You will see the occasional thing where an incredibly wealthy family wants to take you for the year on their yacht because they're doing a world tour and they want their kids educated along the way. You will see these gigs advertised very, very occasionally, but they're rare. It's not something I'd be holding out for. The last type of work we'll look at, and I think we've touched on this in almost every video so far, is formal educational establishments, by which I mean typical schools as we understand them and as we probably went to as kids, colleges, universities, that kind of thing. The formal places where formal education happens, and there is often some level of government involvement. The pros here are many. The hours, for example, are very predictable and very good, and are not, in the short term at least, based on student enrolment. You will tend to go in with a 2-year contract, so your security is much better as well. And the pay is very good. Say very good, usually very, very good by local standards. So I'm in Myanmar at the moment. I'm on a wage that I maybe would struggle with a little in England, but here my quality of life is extremely high from a financial standpoint, earning 20 times more than most of the people that I will see if I go out for a walk this afternoon. Another pro is that there's usually a good support network of experienced people who started out like you did, and they know the score, they know the problems you're going to face, they'll want to support you with that, because the expat community is, generally speaking, a very friendly one. So you do get more of a support network than you would find in private language schools, and certainly in private tutoring, where you are very much on your own. I should add that when you come to the level of formal educational establishments, it's very normal for them, particularly in Asia, to provide accommodation, and a lot of that accommodation is really, really great. In Brunei, we lived in this, which was a 5-bedroom detached house with its own land. That was amazing. Lived in there for 7 years, didn't pay a penny for it. And more recently, we're living here now. I'm sorry about the state of it, but we are moving out. And we're living in very nice apartments all over the place at no expense to ourselves. Just paying utilities, that sort of thing. The place I'm moving to in China will also include utilities, and because it's on site, food. So the potential for saving money in this coming job should be extremely good. But when you're looking at the money, it's something that's really worth considering. This isn't so common in Western Europe. It seems to be that the further east you go, the more likely you are to get a good deal with accommodation included in your job. The cons? Well, it's hard work. Your hours are predictable, but they're often long, and it's hard work. There's a lot of preparation to do for lessons, there's a lot of marking to do, there's a lot of meetings to attend, there's a lot of just stuff that you wouldn't expect that needs to be done if you're working in, say, an international school. That's what I'm doing for a living now, and yeah, it's a lot of work, it's hard work. There are very high expectations from parents who are paying, generally speaking, a lot of money for their kids to be at the school. In a state school, that's maybe not quite so pressing, but it's still an issue. If you've worked in schools in the UK, and I know some of you will have done, from where I'm advertising this video, you might find that some of the management practices in schools overseas are a little bit unfamiliar or daunting, and a lot of those rights, or a lot of those practices, are based around your diminished rights as a foreigner in the country. The other thing that you've got to deal with when you go into private schools or state schools or schools generally, you have to remember that in these circumstances, the children, and they will be children usually, that you're teaching are not there through choice. So there's often issues with motivation and just willingness to get involved and partake and take those risks that you need children to take in a language lesson. They've got to be willing to make mistakes, they've got to be happy to have a go, and when they're at school, as we were, with all our friends around them, they're very often a little bit concerned about looking daft, and that makes them quite reluctant to speak. So a lot of your time and energy will be going into building up the confidence of these kids to give them the willingness to just have a go and make mistakes. Behaviour management can be a thing. It depends on the countries that you go to. Here in Myanmar, behaviour management really hasn't been much of an issue at all. In Hungary, a little more so. In Brunei, no issues whatsoever. And I'm moving to China very soon, where I'm told there'll be very few issues in the particular school that I'm going to as well. So I've been very lucky with that, but I do know people who've been out. The Middle East is notoriously bad for behaviour. So if you're not ready to exercise those kind of hard classroom management skills, the schools are maybe not the place for you, certainly in some parts of the world. So, you've made it to part 2 of the video. How do we go about finding the various jobs I've talked about and starting your career teaching English overseas? Well, I've got it all here, but it's not as hard as you'd think. So let's get into it. If you're looking at those very basic language school jobs, those starter positions, you'll find that these kind of jobs, it's possible just to pitch up in a country and knock on language school doors. I think that's becoming less common as time has gone on, but that is a possibility. I know people who've done that. I haven't quite done that myself, but I have been approached while I've been in country by language school owners or other teachers who've gone, please can you help us? And I've gone on and done stints in these places with very mixed results. But if you are in country, you've got a very good chance of picking up this sort of work. Where you stand on visas and things with that sort of thing is a different matter, because very often you're going to need a particular working visa to be allowed to work in the country, and you're going to need a job before you go in order to get the working visa. But that's not the case everywhere, so do check out your options for finding work while you're there. If you started looking for a job from home, and I recommend that you do, I don't really recommend turning up and just hoping for the best, unless the money doesn't matter to you and you're not bothered about the longevity of your trip and all of that. So a great place to look for these jobs are, I think we'd call them bulletin boards back in the day, websites that just have job listings. My favourite of them all is Dave's ESL Cafe. I'll put a caption somewhere and maybe even a picture if I can get my editing skills together. Dave's ESL Cafe has job after job after job after job after job all over the world, and a lot of them are for kind of starter positions in language schools. You'll get actual schools on there, you'll get universities on there, but not so many. These are predominantly language school jobs that are doing those late afternoon, evening classes that we talked about before. We'll go pros and cons again. On the good side, there are many jobs and many openings on these pages. On the downside, there are a lot of people on these pages who are just looking for your information. They're on there data mining essentially, and you may find that the less scrupulous of them may be looking for your passport and your address and your telephone number and your date of birth and your full name and all of these things that you would always give to an employer. Some people are looking for those for nefarious reasons. Just be very careful about who you pass that information on to. If it feels dodgy, it probably is. The broadsheets. When I talk about the broadsheets, I'm talking about the Times and the Guardian and those kind of papers. But I'm not talking about the papers themselves, I'm talking about the websites that are associated with them. So for example, the Times newspaper has the Times Educational Supplement, which has features about education around the world and all the rest, but also has a very well developed and very well respected means of advertising jobs and applying for them. The plus side of this is that because these things are not cheap to advertise on, it is a financial commitment for a school to do it, and they will be mostly school and university type jobs that you're going to find in the broadsheets. Because it's quite expensive, you will only have serious job offers on there. So the jobs that have already been given to somebody else, the jobs that aren't real, we just want your details, the jobs, well, we might need somebody but we don't know, will tend not to be on there just because of the financial commitment that the schools have to make in order to advertise there. The other good thing about them, and I'm going to bring this into the cons as well, so bear with me, is that they will generally save your details. So once you've filled in the major application form, for a lot of jobs advertised there, you don't need to fill in all that information again. Both websites, the Times and the Guardian, will allow you to save your details on there and go some way at least to filling out application form. The cons, the downside of these broadsheet publications is, well, one's a strength and a weakness, they're very, very popular. So you will have a lot of competition for any jobs that are posted on there, particularly in popular destinations. Which means that con number 2 comes into play. You are putting time into applying for these positions. Schools like to see that you've researched them. You really do need to be putting something specific to each school that you're applying for in that application. And even with the help of the autofill features of some of the websites, we're coming to that again in a mo, you can find yourself putting in hours and hours of work on applications to schools that are just not interested in you for some reason that you will never know. Be aware of that. You can waste an awful lot of time on these. And problem number 3 I have with these broadsheets with the websites that go with them is that they're very, very badly put together, in my opinion. So on the Times Educational Supplement, the tests, for example, you can enter your entire work history, and then you take another job somewhere. You've got another job that needs to be at the top of your work history, but the test doesn't allow you to do that. So you're then going through a long editing procedure of shifting jobs down one place at a time to put one back in at the top, and it's a pain in the arse. The autofill facilities never seem to work quite properly. I have put in several utterly erroneous applications because something that I thought had been automatically filled or had claimed to be automatically filled hadn't been automatically filled, and that's very, very frustrating, particularly if it's a job that you're really interested in. These are not my favourite approaches to looking for work. Okay, the next one is direct applications to schools. Again, there's ups and downsides to it. And by direct applications to school, I mean getting your CV and just blasting all the schools in the area with your information in the hope that one of them is looking for you. On the plus side, email's free, it's easy to do, and because you're doing this on such a broad level, you don't really need to be researching the schools themselves unless there's one that you particularly want to work at. You can write your application advertising you, your abilities, your experiences, and your services. Doesn't cost anything, why not have a go? The other nice thing with that is that if a school does take an interest in you, and not all of them will, and not all of them appreciate this approach, but if one does take an interest, it's because of you and your experience and everything else. So they have shown an interest in you, and that is a massive advantage when it comes to interview, which we will look at in a future video. The downside to the approach, obviously, is that this is purely a numbers game. You don't know if the schools are advertising, you don't know who they're looking for if they are advertising, or what positions they're trying to fill. You are just blasting out your CV to everyone. If you can get a list of email addresses for schools, it might be worth a try, but it's not my favourite approach. Bear in mind as well that if later down the line or further down the line you do see a job offer from somewhere and you send in your CV again, they may remember that you are one of the people who essentially spammed them with an application before. So, I say, worth a go, but not my favourite approach. My favourite approach is coming next. And so to my favourite approach to looking for work in international English teaching, and that's agencies. Agencies are gold. I wouldn't use agents for almost anything else, but for looking for international teaching jobs, they are fantastic, and, well, the good ones are fantastic. We'll come to those in a moment. So the way this works is you put in your application to an agency, and the agency is going to interview you. Obviously, you've got to meet certain criteria before they're going to interview you, and that will depend on the kind of clients that they have, whether they operate with language schools, whether they operate with only formal educational establishments. So if you meet those criteria, they're going to interview you, because for them, the more people they have on the books, the better off they are. What they'll then do is either give you a list by some means or other of jobs that they have available, and you can say what you're interested in, and the school will, the agent, will put you forward for them, or they will have the option to put you forward for them. And then if you get the job, the school or the employer will pay the agent a fee, a finder's fee. So it's a fairly typical agent kind of setup, but it works really, really well for some, well, very good reasons. The first of those reasons is that they work with the schools every day for a living, so they have a relationship with the employers, and they know not only the experience that the schools are looking for, but they're also aware of the kind of people that the school are going to get along with, and the kind of people who are going to do well in a particular school. And that gives you a massive advantage when someone that the school already knows and trusts says, we've got a client, Susan, and we think she will be great for you is a lot better than just seeing Susan's CV on your desk with 50 others to read later as well. The next thing is, obviously, this is their living. They are invested in helping you, because if they don't help you to find work, they don't get paid and they don't eat. So having them on board is a massive asset. The next great thing is that because the agents stay in touch with the schools and have that personal relationship with either the head of HR or the head of school, or often both, they're on top of whether people have been employed or not, whether people have been selected, how far the process is through. So you will never, or you'll be rarely applying for jobs that no longer exist. All those roles that you're being put forward for are going to be relevant and are going to be current. And because the first check that the agency is going to do when you've expressed an interest is to call the school and go, hey, is that job still going? You're not going to be wasting any time on pointless applications that are never going to get there for reasons that you can't be aware of when you're putting in the application in the first place. The downsides to working with agents are few, to be honest. But they do exist. So there are some agents that we need to be wary of. I've just been doing a round of applications. I'm going to tell you that story another time, but as you know, I'm moving off to China in a few weeks. I made the mistake of posting my details on Dave's ESL website. The thing I mentioned at the beginning, I maybe didn't mention at the beginning, that you can post your details on the site and let the schools approach you. You will be approached by a lot of agents, small agents, not necessarily real agents. And as I spoke about at the beginning of the video, a lot of those people are just after your data, because the kind of information that you will give to an employer is way greater than the kind of information that you would give to a man in the shop. You're going to give your passport, you're going to give your qualifications, your address, your full name, your date of birth, all things, eventually your bank details even, because they're going to pay you. And these are just all things that can be used to scam you. So do be wary of people contacting you going, oh, I'm an agent, when they very well may not be. I think agents are best approached when you've found them online and you've approached them. Work with the big guys. It will make a massive difference to your experience. Another con that I've mentioned already is that some agents will ask you for an upfront fee. My advice is not to do it, but that's very much up to you and how much you feel you can trust these people. To me, they shouldn't be paid just for putting people on the books. They should be paid for getting people into gainful employment. And finally, there have been a few agents that I've looked at recently as part of my job hunt that have had other motivations. One in particular, I'm not going to name them here, I don't think that's fair. But one in particular really only wanted to sell me tickets to job fairs all over the world. That was absolutely what they were looking to do. They weren't interested in finding me work. They're interested in getting me to pay to go to job fairs, and it was just very underhand and sneaky, and I didn't like it, so I didn't use them after I'd found out what their approach was. Great agencies that I really like. The first one was Teach Anywhere. It's a Randstad company. They've just got me my new position in China. They got me my position in Brunei a few years ago as well. A good few years ago, now I think about it. They're great. many jobs come through. They're very flexible in the way that they work. They've been great, and we've had a really nice relationship, and we've worked together to find the right thing for me. I really like Teach Anywhere. I think they're fantastic. Another one that I've really enjoyed working with has been Teacher Horizons. They've got a slightly different approach. I'll try and put something on screen now. You submit your details to them, and then predominantly at the first stages at least look through their website, and if schools have paid the correct fees to Teacher Horizons, they will have an Apply Now button on their job ads, and you're just going through, seeing what you fancy, and clicking Apply Now. You're limited to 5 applications at a time, or that was certainly the case a few months ago when I was looking. But when the agency has decided whether or not they're going to put you forward for a particular job, that's knocked off your 5, and you can put another one on there. I found working with them particularly rewarding after they'd taken a specific interest in me for a particular job. That led to me having the interview with them, and then just like Teach Anywhere, they built a relationship with me and were in constant contact, and I thought the service that they offered was very good. I came close to a couple of positions with them. I chose one through Teach Anywhere, but I did find the option of work through Teacher Horizons. And an honourable mention goes to Teach Away, who I've never used, but everybody speaks very highly of them. You can find all these people online just by typing in their names to Google, and you're going to find help and assistance with finding work overseas. The final thing I'm just going to mention quickly is personal recommendations, and obviously they are the gold standard. If you have a friend in another school, in a different country even, if they can put you forward as someone they've worked with and they've enjoyed working with and they've respected, and they're going to say that you're a decent person, you can skip all of everything else, because those schools will approach you, and there's a very good chance that you're going to be hired, and that you and your friend are going to be paid a little bonus for that too. Obviously, for schools to go through this whole process is time consuming and it's expensive, so if people know people, that's what they want. Of course, you've got to be on the circuit for a little while before that starts to happen. But that's how I got my job here. A couple of phone calls, friend of a friend, oh, you were looking here, I was looking there. Friend had just got a job, he recommended me. I was almost immediately employed. I've just done that for one of my friends who's just left the country, actually stayed for a year. I made the recommendation, and my friend was employed almost without question. The interviews were a formality. He came over, had a great year. But as I say, you obviously do need to have a few years experience behind you in order for that to start working. So that's it. The kind of work you can be looking for and where to look for it. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video when we'll talk about what happens after you've got that offer. So if you can click subscribe, that'd be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.